Hey, I'm Hoshdeep Singh from Hero Media, and by the end of this video, you would have understood how to create a Shopify application from my boilerplate and how the entire Shopify application Shopify embedded application actually works. Now, before we proceed, please make sure that you have your basic stack fundamentals and knowledge extremely cleared out. So for you to actually make sense of this video, you need to know Express, React, Node.js, JavaScript, of course, and MongoDB. So even if you don't understand MongoDB, it's still fine. If you prefer a SQL or any other database type, that's completely fine too. And we use Vite for building the entire front end of the application. Vite configuration isn't that complicated, so you can just kind of drop that in. But please make sure that you're very clear with your Node, React, and Express basics for it to make sense. All right, so let's jump right into it. So I'll be using my boilerplate. This is a boilerplate that I've built over a year and a half, if I remember correctly. And this is something that's battle tested. I'm using this in production. A lot of engineers are using this in production. So if any issues pop up, we kind of just immediately drop in commits very regularly. So I've been kind of on it. So you can actually depend on this to be using the latest packages, to be using the latest auth flows. Everything else is really up to date. And if it isn't, please feel free to open an issue so we can directly jump on it. Right, so we're gonna clone this repo. I already have it cloned in, so let's quickly open it in VS Code. And let's first go through the entire folder structure. So first you have templates. This is supposed to be a placeholder. Please delete this when you're pushing it out to production. This is meant to have or house all of the templates that you can just copy paste. We have one for webhooks. Of course, we'll be going through all of these step by step. Then you have the GitHub folder and the VS Code folder that you can ignore. The VS Code folder has recommendation for extensions. Right now, it's just Excalidraw in case you want to see the documentation, but this is completely optional. The client side of things is what houses your entire React application, which is the front end. DevUtils is a bunch of utilities that's meant for developers and for good checks. Documentation is where we house the entire documentation. And just putting it out there, this is the Excalidraw file, which kind of goes over the entire architecture of the application. So if you're stuck somewhere or if you want to understand how the flow works, I go through this. But in case you don't have the time to go through this super long video, I know this is going to be really long, but you can just quickly kind of refer to this. And this is the one file that I try to keep updated as as much as possible, because I know, like, I personally depend on this a lot. So you can always depend on the architecture Excalidraw file to get things done. Then is the server, which houses the Express server. Then you have your utils, which houses strategies for session, your database schema, and auth redirection. Then you have the env example file. We'll go over these as the time comes along. But essentially every single thing has been placed in already for you, so you can just clone this file and start working. Get ignore, pretty standard. I use Prettier for prettifying the entire code and formatting it. So Prettier ignore and Prettier RC is the configuration file. Index.html is for us to kind of attach the React application to the front end, and it's also being used by Vite. License, then you have notes. Notes is different from documentation because this houses a lot of tips and tricks that I actually use, and other things that have just come along and I'm like, oh hey, this is going to be really fun and more people should know about it. So this is where I dump a lot of that stuff. Patch.json, pretty standard. We'll go over certain things about why we are overriding certain dependencies. Then you have your standard readme, the setup.md file, which houses step-by-step instructions on how to get it up and running. And it's very thorough. You can actually see every single thing being kind of written in. Then you have the Shopify app toml file. One thing to notice, this repository kind of stays away from the Shopify CLI as much as possible. The reason why that's happening is because I like to have a lot of control over how I build and deploy my applications. And a lot of times, Shopify CLI does a great job of handling a lot of the variables, like the env variables and ngrok stuff for you. I personally like to have control over every single element, which is why we kind of have this completely separated out. The file still exists as an empty file, because if the CLI doesn't find this file, you won't be able to create and upload your extensions. We'll be talking about extensions in a completely different video, because this one is about how to get the base application up and running. To-do.md is where I usually used to write and stuff, but now I've moved everything to issues, so it's kind of more publicly visible. Then you have a wait config file. For most parts, you don't have to touch this. We're going to be talking about how to define variables over here, but as far as the scope of this video is concerned, and a lot of development, things just work out of the box. So you pretty much never have to touch the configuration file. Right, so let's first start with the dev utils file. The first thing you're gonna have is a setup check. The setup check actually checks in for all of your env variables and if you have set those up correctly. Also, the moment you start the server, this is the first thing that's actually running. So you can be very sure that the moment the server is up and you open up your server logs, it's gonna be throwing in errors if there are any. Now, let's actually open the env and see what all is there. First, you have the API key and secret, which you get from your partner dashboard. Then you get the Shopify API scopes. API scopes define what kind of access your shop has. All of the API scopes are actually defined over here. So you can just kind of copy these scopes, and they also kind of give you a good idea about what are they used to access. So it's pretty straightforward on what scopes you want to use and all of that stuff. We're going to be going through this much more in depth as we now build an application. The Shopify app URL is where your app is actually hosted. So this is your base server URL. API version is usually pre-filled. This is mostly using the latest API. As of recording this video, it's already 22.10, so we are one version behind. So let's kind of put this to 10. Then you have your Mongo URL. Because we use MongoDB, this is the connection string. If it doesn't find the connection string, it kind of pushes back to sourcing for a local instance. Encryption string is necessary. Without this, the app will start breaking and it won't actually start the server. This is because all the sessions that we store in the database are actually encrypted. The port variable is something that you mostly do not have to manually define. If you're used to hosting your application on Heroku, the port is pre-filled, so you almost never have to define the port variable. The npm config force is actually really necessary. In fact, in docs, I have a different one for different file for deployment that actually kind of goes over NotFlank, Railway, and Heroku, the three hosting services that I actually recommend because I personally use them. I really love NotFlank and Heroku, of course. But yeah, so essentially what's happening is because let's open up package. Because we are on pretty much the latest version for every single package that's available, a lot of things, especially the Shopify app CLI and the CLI kit, along with Polaris, don't really like it. These four packages want React to be below version 18, so you're talking somewhere in the 17 series as of right now. Then we kind of override those dependencies just so that everything works as expected. I haven't seen anything breaking so far, given that this application is now running on production. I believe there's almost 30 applications that I know of, which is either written by me or an engineer who's using my repository. And so far things aren't breaking, so it's fine. In case you figure out how to break this, please open an issue. I would love to actually look into this. All right, so now that we have the setup check out of the way, let's move on to the update dashboard. Now what happens is every single time you update your ngrok URL, you need to update every single thing on your Shopify dashboard. This is one of the common errors that you will mostly run into initially if you're super new to the Shopify app development space. Is you're going to have this error where it shows you that your redirect URI is not whitelisted. We will be emulating that error very soon when we start up the service. But this is how we kind of go about it. Now there's like one limitation. which is we cannot update the GDPR URLs and the app proxy URLs purely because it's just not available in the API. So there's nothing we can do about it unless Shopify is like, well, here's the access. And the moment that happens, I'm going to be updating that almost instantly because I hate having to open the partner dashboard every single time. So those are the dev utils. You can still throw out update dashboard from a production app, but I would recommend keeping setup check in because the moment you start your servers, it's going to immediately show you like, hey, maybe an env variable is missing or you're not following the right protocols for things and stuff like that. So highly recommend keeping setup check in. We can skip docs because, well, docs. And now let's hop on to utilities directly. We will be going to server, but if we don't follow up on utilities, server and client won't really make sense. So the first thing I'm going to do is a database schema. It's kept extremely simple on purpose, right? So you have two schema models available to you. One is the session model and one is the store model, right? Your store model is essentially defining if a specific shop has the app installed currently or not. This is used kind of as a benchmark to check if the app has been uninstalled and the user is reinstalling it. This is what kind of ensures that the reinstallation process goes as smoothly as possible. So this is very important. We're going to be breaking this again on purpose to just kind of show how everything works. And yeah, so this is just the My Shopify URL and isActive, which is a Boolean. Now coming to session model, you have three kind of entries over here: the ID, the content, and the shop. The shop is the My Shopify URL. The ID is the session ID because we're going to be using session ID to kind of load and delete our sessions when we later look into session storage a little shortly. Content is the actual session object, which is encrypted and kept in. This is done on purpose because if your session tokens are leaked, well, anyone can actually make requests to those stores and you never want that to happen. Which is why encryption strings back in the env are like super important. We're going to skip auth redirect for now because it's going to make sense when we talk about the auth middleware. The session storage is a custom written session strategy that loads, stores, and deletes the session. All right. So there's three functions, like I just said: the store callback, the load callback, and the delete callback. Delete callback is pretty simple. It takes the ID as an input, finds all of the sessions with that ID, and deletes them. Load callback again takes an ID, finds the session. If it finds the session, it decrypts the session object, and then you have a JSON object, right? Any Shopify app would still work with a JSON session, but a lot of the session methods would break. This is something that's already available over here at the top. And it took me personally a while to figure out because, well, things were just breaking and we had no idea why. And we had to implement all of those methods manually, only for someone later to be like, hey, you kind of need to convert that into a Shopify session object, which is what we're doing here. We return it by cloning it into a session object with that session object ID. And of course, if we don't find anything, we're going to return as undefined. This is something that we handle later in verifyRequest. And of course, store callback is essentially where we create or update that specific session. And this takes the entire session as an object because this is the starting point for everything. So yeah, this is the utilities folder in short. Now let's hop onto the server. Middlewares, and let's talk about, so I'm going to come to auth at the last because it's pretty complicated, right? And a lot of people kind of hate dealing with authentication and it gets a little complicated, but it's pretty straightforward once you figure out what's exactly happening. All right, so CSP stands for Content Security Policy. This essentially defines how the app is embedded or not embedded in our Shopify admin. So since this is around embedded, what usually happens is the moment the app loads, it sets a header that, hey, this app is being loaded in an iframe and the parent of that iframe can only be the shop or the my Shopify URL or admin.shopify.com. So currently we are using the the store name.myshopify.com/admin, but very soon it's going to be switching over to admin.shopify.com. So in a way, you're handling both the use cases at once. If your app isn't embedded, you kind of want to make sure the app is a standalone app and it's not in an iframe. So this is where you set your frame ancestors to none, so that so you're kind of telling the browser that, hey, this is not supposed to be in an iframe. This is its own thing. So that's content security policy. isShopActive is something that kind of deals with reinstallation and to check if the app is currently installed in the store or not. So the way this is just like checking for Boolean values, if it's active, if it's not, kind of pushing it over to authentication and kind of going about a day. VerifyRequest is a very interesting one. The moment I realized what's actually happening, I was a little mad. I tried figuring out how can we actually make this better, but turns out I couldn't find anything. So VerifyRequest is essentially being used to ensure that all of the requests that are coming in the Shopify app, especially the routes that you create, are actually from authenticated shops and not from a third party. So what happens here is this is a middleware, so it takes request, response, and next. It figures out the shop from the query. It loads up a session. I honestly haven't seen this happening just yet, but this is a very fun thing that I'll be talking about in a later video of how, why this is exactly placed here. So essentially what's happening is it checks that, hey, if you get a session and if you get a shop, and if the current shop that we have in that session actually belongs to the shop or not. So what essentially this is doing is you could load the session for store A, but you could have store B in the params. This is something for a viewer application that I'll talk about later, which I haven't seen enough people talk about. So yeah, but this is still placed in just in case that ever happens. I still can't think of any other scenarios, which kind of takes you to auth redirect, coming to this very shortly. We check if the session's active. If the session is active, we actually make a GraphQL request. And what we do is we make this short GraphQL request of getting the shop name. If everything works perfectly, we are like, hey, everything's good to go. The session is right. The shop is right. The request goes through. Let's move on to the next thing. If it's not, well, let's just throw back to authentication. If we don't find a shop, we try to figure out the shop using the session. And then we also kind of check up for the headers. And then, but if we still can't find a shop, or if the shop is blank, we just throw in, be like, hey, can't find a shop. Or sometimes you just can't authorize it. A bunch of things happen. So it's just like, hey, let's just throw you the authentication, right? Because if you actually have something which needs to be authenticated, or maybe like your sessions have expired, maybe some other new issue has happened, it's just easier to throw everything on authentication, because that just levels the entire playing ground. So authentication middleware. We'll be talking about verify, HMAC, and proxy when we come to it, but authentication middleware is by far where I get the most requests on, hey, how does it actually work? So we have three routes here, which is /auth, /auth/tokens, and /auth/callback. So now here's what happens. Your entry point is for installation from the Shopify App Store is your server URL /auth, and then the shop is passed in as a parameter. Now instantly the first thing is it takes you to auth redirect, right? Where it first checks if a shop has been provided. Now again, we'll be emulating all of this later when we boot up the server. And then we check if the app's embedded. So this is just to check if it's coming from the front end or the back end, the request. Shopify has added a new query, which is embedded equals 1. So if it's equal to 1, that means it's coming from the React side of things, and we want to take it over to exit frame, which will come to this. But let's kind of first understand how auth works, and then let's come on to that. So if it's not embedded, which means it's coming from the server side, what we do is now we begin the auth, right? So we pass in the request response and the shop parameters. We tell it, hey, after this is done, I want to take it to auth/tokens. And false stands for this is the offline token, right? So there's two kinds of tokens with Shopify, the online and the offline tokens. The offline token is a permanent token. If you lose it, you're going to be generating the exact same one. The online token refreshes every 24 hours. So in a way, your auth pretty much runs at least once every 24 hours for every single shop. So, we start the authentication here. We tell Shopify, hey, here's all the parameters you need. Here's the shop parameter. I want the offline token, and when you send it back to me, I kind of want you to redirect me to my auth/tokens. And of course, we put it in a try-catch block just to see if we are running into any issues, and we kind of log it, or we just redirect and try again. Then we come to tokens, where we validate that callback, right? It's really important that we do this because this is how the auth actually works, right? So we pass the request, the response, and all of the queries that we get back. And then we load up a session. And then we actually get the shop in access token from a session object, which is what we use to validate. We're kind of storing all of that content in the session because this is what the object is, right? And by the way, in the background, our session storage strategy is handling writing and reading from the database. So we're not actively kind of messing around with things. Now what we do is we register all of our webhooks over here. So we kind of go over the webhook registrar object, which is essentially like bringing in all of the webhook registries that we have available and just telling Shopify, be like, hey, I want you to register me for these specific webhook topics. Now, one thing that we check for here is we are excluding the GDPR topics, which is shop redact, customer redact, and customer something. I forgot. So that's shop redact, customer redact, and customer data request. My bad. So we're just telling this thing, be like, hey, if it's one of those topics, I wanted to exclude those because that's gonna fail anyways, right? And then we kind of check to see, like, hey, have we actually registered it or not? Then we kind of do the auth process again, because the last time we got the offline tokens, this time we want the online tokens. So we do the exact same thing, except this time we like, hey, Shopify, I want the online tokens, but this time I want you to send me to callback. Basic error handling, and then we come to callback. We do the exact same session with validate auth callback, and this is where we update the model to true, which means that we have the online tokens, we have the offline tokens, and now we are good to go to say like, hey, everything worked completely fine. Database mark the shop is completely true, and of course at any given point of time, if we run into issues, we kind of set the shop to false, and we're like, hey, let's kind of go through the entire auth process again. So this is there. But sometimes what happens is when the online tokens expire after 24 hours, you're not going to be asking the merchant to head over to the auth URL and kind of install the entire app again. So what happens is we redirect the merchant to exit frame, right? And if we go to a client, we'll be kind of going more into this when we come to the client side of things. All we are doing here is we get all of the params, we get the redirect URI string that is already kind of set up for us, which is what this entire params is doing. And then we tell Shopify, be like, hey, can we set up a new AppBridge instance and call the redirect method, and please let me exit the frame. So this is what redirect.action.remote kind of does, is it allows you to leave the embedded application or the Shopify admin and open up a new URL in the parent, right? Otherwise, you're going to be navigating to new URLs inside of the iframe, and that's something that we do not want. So this is just what exit frame does. Even if you switch up the entire project, you need to have this available. Otherwise, you won't be able to kind of handle redirection from the front end. And of course, we'll be breaking everything and seeing the entire thing in action. So this is how the entire auth process works. I hope the entire thing makes sense. If not, I'm more than happy to kind of create a separate video. Please let me know in the comments if this was clear enough. Otherwise, I'm going to be going line by line and explaining, hey, this is how the entire thing works. And of course, now that we have this kind of running up, let's kind of directly jump onto the server. And we're going to be talking about verify HMAC and verify proxy and how the entire thing works. That was weird. All right. So we import everything. We run a setup check. We pull in a port, and the first thing we do is we check if we are running in dev mode. So if we come back to package.json, in a dev script, we actually pass in node env as dev, and this is the only time that we tell the server like, hey, if dev exists, kind of assign it as the dev mode. And this is really important. We're going to be coming into this in just a second. Right. So we decide if the server is currently in dev mode or not. And then we move on to, this is a Boolean value, by the way. And then we connect to Mongo, pretty standard thing. If you're used to MongoDB, or if you're using Prisma, you don't actually have to create these. But like whatever your chosen database strategy is, this is where you kind of quickly connect. So this is where things are with the database connection. And then this is again really important, right? This is the Shopify context. This essentially sets up global variables for the entire Shopify app that, hey, this is what the app is. This is what the API keys are. This is what the scopes are. This is where the app resides. This is the API version to use. If the app is embedded, and what session storage to use. So if you don't define a session storage, it's going to be using, I believe, SQLite by default. Things have been changing and I haven't really looked much into it because I usually write my own session storage. So this is what's actually calling in our 3 store, load, and delete callbacks. And this is where we are handling this entire strategy. So once this is done, we register all of our webhooks. Now, all of your webhooks come from the webhook registrar, which is available in the webhooks folder inside of server. We enter index, and this is where you can see where we are adding all of the handlers. So the way this function works is we call Shopify webhooks registry and add handlers. We define the topic. Now the topic can actually be seen from webhook subscription topic. Again, the links are available in the description. So we have app installed over here. We kind of throw that in. We tell the Shopify servers like, hey, this is what the path is. And the moment this path is called, we want you to use this function as a handler. So in order to define the path, which will come to very soon, the topic has to be exactly the same as the path because we're using a dynamic route to kind of handle all of the paths at once. The webhook handler is the function that handles this. In our case, if we actually open up app uninstall handler, you would see that the function takes 3 params: the topic, the shop, and the webhook request body. The topic is what topic is being called, the shop is the my Shopify URL, and the webhook request body actually contains the content. In terms of the app uninstall handler, all we want to do is set the installed shop to false, and we want to delete any sessions related to that Shopify store that we have. So that's all this does. So in case tomorrow someone wants to reinstall the application, they start from a clean slate because we just need these two to be clean. So you can actually retain all of the other merchant data for the next 48 hours until you get the shop redact webhook. The only thing that you want to clear out from your database is the sessions and define the shop to be false. And then you kind of come up here. So if you want to add in more webhooks, all you have to do is figure out what you want to, what webhook you want to subscribe to. For example, cards create here. We kind of add this over here, create this into an object, add in path. So this is going to be /webhook /cards_create, ensuring that the topic and the path are actually the same. And then we kind of, webhook handler. Let's just kind of define app uninstall handler here itself. So this is how you kind of add more. So if you want to define another one, you just kind of go over here. And all of these are, of course, during your auth process, automatically picked up and immediately registered for you. So you don't have to worry about going back and adding multiple things in multiple places. So it's like one-stop shop, add things here and just forget about them. Now we come on to creating the server. This is into a function so we can load all of the stuff that's required, and then we kind of listen on the Express server. Right. So the first thing we do is we define a new variable called root as process.cwd, which means current working directory. This dynamically gets where the actual app is running, right? We create a new instance of the Express thing. We apply the auth middleware, which is the auth.js. And then this is the webhook part, right? So you can see it's webhook / topic. Another thing to note is please do not call express.json before this. So if we kind of head more into this line is what actually helps the app process all of the webhooks. So if you call app.use express.json over here, it's going to break your entire app purely because this doesn't play along really well with registry.process, which is why this middleware is kind of defined back in here, right? So this is your webhooks post route. This is what automatically handles the entire thing. If you don't find the right request, if you don't find the right headers, all of that is immediately kind of taken care of. So, you can just forget about this. The next is creating the GraphQL post route. This uses the verifyRequest middleware. And all it does is it creates a GraphQL proxy. So every single GraphQL request that you make from your Shopify app goes via the /GraphQL route. And again, if it goes well, send the response.body. If it doesn't work out, send up the error. Then we kind of start off with the express.json. This is the equivalent of body parser if you're coming in from older versions of Express. The content security policy is isShopActive. And then we come on to our user routes. So any single route that you write kind of uses this middleware. So it resides in /apps, and then you use the verifyRequest middleware, and then you come into your user routes. So user routes reside inside of routes and an index. Every single route that you write can just directly go in here. So this is where you kind of get to play around with things and be like, hey, just let's throw in all of our routes and forget about having to verify each and every single route, right? And the same goes for proxy route. Here we use the verify proxy. So all we do here is we generate a new signature given how Shopify generates it on their end, and then we check if it actually is the right signature or not. You don't have to really go in depth because it just blindly follows how Shopify creates signatures. It's all available in the documentation. And all we do is we kind of generate our own signature and we calculate it. And then we see if it's actually the signature that Shopify sent us. If it's the same one, we move along. If not, we stop the request and we throw a 401. And then this comes in proxy router, which is in the routes. If you don't know what an app proxy is, it's mostly used for theme extensions. So if you are using a theme extension where the user kind of or the merchant, has to add in one of your app blocks onto the theme, this is how you will be interacting, because you're not going to be making calls to your server. You're going to be making calls to the Shopify store URL /apps/ whatever stuff you prefer. So this goes via the proxy route. We will be setting this up very soon. So yeah. And then let's come to GDPR. Setting up GDPR has always been, at least from my memory, an issue, at least for newbies, me included. Shopify, if I remember this correctly, now you can actually kind of set up the entire thing as a webhook. This is the strategy I was using earlier. But this is like, I find this much easier and it's already preset. So all you have to do is write the functions. This uses the verify HMAC middleware. Now this is the exact same thing, except like we are completely working with a different kind of signature, checking if it's the right one and kind of pushing it through, right? So nothing much to do here. The GDPR functions reside in the controllers folder where you have the customer data request, the customer redact, and the shop redact functions. Now, testing these out is a little complicated because you can't manually invoke them, which is why I have added in example payloads across the board. So just so that you have this benchmark, okay, hey, I know what's happening. The one GDPR route that we can actually test out is the shop redact. The way you kind of do this is you install the app on a store and then you uninstall it, and then 48 hours later, Shopify is gonna send you the shop redact. Uh, uh, and like this is pretty much the only way how we can test this out. And I really want to sneeze, but okay, let's kind of go about that. Now, Vite configuration. I hate the fact that my Vite configuration doesn't support hot module reload in Safari and Firefox. This is something that's wrong in my end. I'm still figuring it out. So if you know how to kind of set this up, please make a PR. But this doesn't affect anything in production, right? So you don't have to worry about it. You just have to end up using Chrome instead of Safari or Firefox. What this does is it creates a new WebSocket server where any single change that you make on the client is instantly reflected on your Shopify app without having to reload multiple times. I'm going to show a demo of this when we boot up the server. So this is essentially checking if we are in dev mode, spinning up the Vite server and moving along. But if we're not in dev mode, we compress things and we want to serve a static file. And then all we do is we head over to disk/client, which is where Vite kind of builds up the entire front-end application and throws in, and then we just serve that in, and that's when we kind of serve the file from. So now let's actually start up the server and break a few things and see how the entire thing functions. For that, first let's create a new application. So let's head over to apps. Create a new app, create app manually. Let's call it YouTube shop app. So another thing to note is you want to choose your distribution type right away. If you don't do this, a few things break, like you can't use the billing API. So I prefer using the Shopify App Store distribution method. And of course, it's just for test and I'm going to be deleting it. So I'm not really too worried about this. Now let's head back to overview. Let's copy these. Let's make the .env file and let's open it. Whoops. Now API key goes here. My secret goes here. For scopes, I'm just gonna add in random ones. For now, this is something that I always add in. I prefer pulling Shopify app URL down. We don't need this, don't need this, don't need this. All right, encryption string stays as encryption string. So our env is pretty much set up. Now what we're gonna do is we want to set up ngrok for tunneling. Whoops. All right, so I forgot to actually install my npm packages. I thought I had those installed. All right, so while this is happening, we can just create a new folder called Mongo and start MongoD db.mongo. So what this is doing is it's creating a local instance of a MongoDB server. Now I use MongoDB Compass to kind of see what's happening in my databases. So you can just throw in your URI and click on connect. Because we haven't started the server, we don't see our database just yet. Our database would be available as Shopify Express app. All right, so dependencies are installed. Let's clean this out and let's start ngrok. So we wait for a second for it to boot up, copy this, head over to env and add the URL over here. Now we're going to be directly running the app, right? So let's npm run dev, everything goes through. And let's select a store to install it in. I'm going to be installing it on one of the dev stores. And now we're going to run into this issue where it's like, hey, nothing's over here because Shopify auto-populates this with an example.com domain. So let's actually go back to our app setup. And now here is where we're going to actually find this. So now instead of manually updating it, what we're going to do is we're going to run npm run update URL. So what this does is it fetches all of the tokens and it will ask you to log in. So you just click on enter or any key for that matter. You can log into Shopify. It shows you the screen and then it kind of updates the entire thing automatically. So Once it is done running and we come back to our setup and we refresh, you're going to see that your app URL and your allowed redirection URLs are automatically updated. Now let's kind of break this. So let's remove a few strings, right? And let's run npm run dev. So this means it's actually going to the right server, but we don't have this kind of available in the right place. So let's copy this URL. Let's go to /auth shop equals, this is my test store. And this is gonna happen. It's gonna tell you like, hey, the redirect URI is not whitelisted. So you're gonna come back to your app. You're gonna stop the server and let's kind of copy this thing back in here, right? And let's start the server up again. And now when we kind of restart this process, which is /auth shop equals myshopify.com. Now we're going to find that, okay, hey, it's actually taking us to the right place and we can install this unlisted app and we are good to go, right? And you can see like the webhook has just got registered, which is just because we're doing it app installed. It's running a few things initially and we are good to go. So this is what you get straight out of the box. It's a bunch of debug cards. We'll be going over these right now. But first, let's actually break the app. So we're going to go back to MongoDB Compass. Let's refresh. We find Shopify Express app over here. And then we're going to see active store, which is my test store, and this active is true, right? And the session where we have both the sessions available. Now what's going to happen is if I delete the sessions, it's going to break, right? And in order to invoke one of these things, what we have to do is we have to get to the verifyRequest middleware. And we do that by making an API request to the server. And making API calls kind of covers that. So all I'm going to do is click on get data and it takes you to exit frame. It goes through the entire process, fetches all of the tokens again, runs the auth process essentially, and takes you back to the app, right? So now when we come back here and we refresh, you're going to see that both the tokens are generated automatically back again. And this is really fun, right? Because you could essentially like break things and still be like, okay, hey, let me just quickly run through the entire auth and you're good to go. Especially great if you're like me and you forget your encryption strings. So all you have to do is like create a new encryption string and delete all of the tokens from your database. The next time someone logs in, or if they're already logged in, the auth process happens. None of the motion data is actually touched from your database and everyone's back to business, right? So this is how the entire auth process works. This is how we know things work perfectly fine. And let's actually take a look at the app uninstalled webhook, right? So what we're going to do is head over to apps, settings and channels, and by the shop app, and we're going to remove this. So instantly, well, almost instantly, we're going to have the app uninstalled webhook firing in. All of the sessions are deleted and back in active stores, now it's set to false. So this means that we actually did a good job of setting up the entire webhook as we wanted it. So now that we have that working up again, let's kind of go back to the auth process. Let's install the app. And this is where you know that the app's working fine, where you can actually go through the entire process again without actually running into any issues. So this actually fortifies the entire thing that our auth works as expected. Now you can take it to the next level by installing it in 2-3 different stores and testing it out just so that you know that your multi-store strategy actually works. This one though, it's already battle tested since it's in production, and if any issues happen, it's almost instantly taken care of. It's either like, a new issue is opened up or I make a new commit, so you can always rely on this to be up to date for as long as it's being actively maintained, of course. So now that we have the server side of things kind of up and running, let's talk about the client side of things. Now, index.html is what this actually app is kind of rendering in. So this is where Vite kind of attaches the entire React application over here. And this is the entry client. So if you follow that inside of client, we have the entry client JSX file, which is, if you're used to the new React 18 formats, you know that this is how we're kind of rendering the entire thing. And it's rendering app, which is over here. Now, Uh, the entire app.jsx file is nothing but a bunch of Polaris and Abrish providers, right? And that's being configured and thrown in. The navigation menu is actually this side. This is what actually controls the entire navigation, which is coming from over here. My provider is your Apollo client kind of being configured and being thrown into React. So if you don't use Apollo client, if you use React query or some other strategy, you can modify this over here. A very important one is user logged in fetch, because this allows us to create authenticated requests to our backend. We'll be coming to this very soon, but just know that this is a very important one. So instead of using Axios and the native fetch function, what we do is we create an instance of user logged in fetch and we make requests from there. So another one to note is I am using Ravager instead of React Router DOM for all of my routing needs, right? So essentially what I'm doing is I'm importing all of the pages and I'm creating an entire route. You can read more about Ravager's documentation. It's really great. I personally love it a lot and it's super easy to use. So you can always kind of swap this out with React Router DOM or any other navigation strategy that you want to use. All right, so app.jsx, the first thing that's opening up is the index. And here's a bunch of debug cards. This has been put in place so that you have an example for some of the very basic things that you want to do. For example, if you want to see what webhooks are registered, we can actually come over here. It makes a GraphQL request and it shows you like, hey, this is where the actual, like these are the registered webhooks and these are the callback URLs. So if we kind of break down index, it's a regular page with the exception of full screen. What essentially it does is, because a lot of times you want to exit full screen, you can use the full screen APIs to kind of figure out how it actually works. This is a functioning example, so we'll be talking about it just like in the next step. So essentially what we're doing is we're creating an instance of full screen using AppBridge, and then we exit it. Now, this doesn't make sense right now, but here's how it works, right? The moment you open full screen, it kind of hides everything. And then when you click on back, it comes back to this, right? So you can always be sure that the moment you come back to index, you are exiting full screen 100%. Right, so the first one being full screen, let's kind of open up this one. Again, what we're doing here is we're just creating a new full screen instance and we are entering full screen. One thing to notice, you need to have the full screen bar always available in your full screen pages, right? This is something that's required by Shopify. This is something that I make it very clear over here that, hey, full screen bar is actually required, just so that you don't miss it. And of course, you can set up buttons and all of the other stuff that's kind of pre-hooked for you, so you have something to take a look at. Get data is like my favorite one, because if you actually come in here, what it does is it creates a get request, it creates a post request, and it creates a GraphQL request, right? So let's kind of break this down. This is the get request where we kind of set state and then we create a fetch, right? But this fetch is actually an instance of user logged in fetch, right? It's not the regular fetch that we're used to. We call it to apps API, we get the text and we throw it here. But when you're making a post request, of course, we need to set the right headers, otherwise it's gonna break. Method to post, and we create a body. The same thing goes with kind of GraphQL. It is a get function because we are not sending out any variables over here. But we can actually open up the routes, which is in server routes index, and you can actually see how the entire thing functions. Especially with GraphQL request being made on server side, you need to fetch the session, then get the client, create a client, a GraphQL client, create the query, and then send the data back. So this is how we kind of work with get data. So you can actually mess around with this a lot. One common issue that you're gonna run into is sometimes it doesn't, and this is because of Ravager, I believe, that sometimes it doesn't want to send requests to the right routes, right? So what you can do over here is the Vite config file actually defines app origin. The app origin is actually our app host, right? This is the base ngrok URL. So all you have to do is, I lost track, right? When you come back to get data, and if you feel like it's not doing the right calls, you can kind of push this out, and you can call it as HTTPS app origin /app/API. Let's refresh. So I don't have HMR on Safari. I'm going to show you like how HMR actually works. Let's go back to get data, and you would see that it still works, right? Sometimes this thing fails, and this is how you get around it. So if it fails somewhere else, if you feel like it's not making the right requests, this is how you kind of get around it. And if you notice, we haven't actually defined app origin anywhere else because we have only like one instance of this. This is because when Vite's building the app, it automatically populates the values. So you can use app origin throughout your entire React app. And if you want to have other variables, you can just throw them in define. But please make sure you're not putting out any secret variables over here, because the moment this is out, anyone can possibly access it, and well, you're done, messed up. Right. So we go back, and then subscription. This is particularly a really fun one because you have to use the billing API in order to kind of, make money from your application. So I have this quick kind of setup done, which is for server-side recurring subscriptions, which subscribes the merchant. So let's see it in action, and then let's see how it works, right? So this creates a new subscription for $10.25. Also, you need to make sure that your values are always a decimal, just so that things are very clear. You click on subscribe merchant, it loads up, it makes the request, and it takes you to the billing page, right? It's already set up for you. So if you actually head up to server and then routes and then recurring subscription, you can see how the entire thing works. You can see how, what GraphQL requests you're making, and like how we're fetching the tokens and how we are pushing back the requests. So now here's the thing, right? I would recommend creating a new route for every single plan that you have, just so that it's very easy to kind of take care of everything. But that's about it. Oh, right. So I'm sorry. This is my bad. I forgot to update this. We kind of want to have the URL to be back over here. Let's kind of go back. So auth/top level was actually one of the previous ones. This is like a modified repository that I haven't updated. So yeah, I'll kind of have that updated before this video goes live. So save this, go back to subscribe merchant. And let's click on approve, wait for a second. It's gonna take us back through the entire authentication process and back to the application, right? Because we're just taking it to auth. The reason why we're taking it to auth is so that we always land up in the right page, right? You can always change this to any other landing page, but I personally prefer taking it back to auth. So now if we go back to active subscriptions and view it, we're gonna actually see that $10.25 plan is actually active. And this is coming in from active subscriptions. It's a simple GraphQL request. We make the request, we pull it in, and we show the data, right? So this in short is, well, it wasn't in short, but this is how the entire Shopify embedded app actually works. So tomorrow, if you want to build up on this, you can use this repository and, pick up what actually makes sense for you, do what needs to be done. This is more of a like, hey, this is how the entire thing works. And I hope this video actually made sense through and throughout, because I get a lot of requests asking me like, hey, can you please explain how the entire thing works? And a lot of people get a lot of rejections based on, hey, your auth process isn't working as expected, your GDPR routes aren't working as expected. And this is how you get around the entire thing, right? One thing I forgot to kind of add in is actually the app proxies. Right, so back in the partner dashboard, because we don't actually have that set up, let's kind of copy this. Now this is how you set up the app proxy, right? Let's head back into server index. And we know that we're making it to proxy routes. Where is the proxy route? Yeah, so the proxy route is where we kind of land upon. So in the proxy URL, we add in the base server URL, and then we add proxy underscore route. And of course, you can change all of this. And now, just to kind of give you a reminder that setup.md exists, we kind of can go down. Where is my app proxy? Right. So now the configuration is the subpath is, so essentially this is going to show up like this, right? Let's kind of add in here and save this. So it's going to be, in our case, which is apps and express proxy. So it's going to be like the shop URL /apps/express proxy, and any request that is made to that specific proxy is taken over to proxy underscore route. Now let's open up the proxy route, and we have a route available here, which is /JSON. So let's go to heroes test store apps express proxy /JSON. We see that, hey, content proxy be working, which is what we are returning from over here. So essentially what happens is every single time a request is made over to your proxy URL, it is taken over to the proxy underscore route, and that's where the stuff comes from. So yeah, this is pretty much an entire configuration of, or an entire explanation of how the entire app actually works. Please feel free to kind of get in touch with me. I am very active on Twitter, so you can always kind of get in touch with me via Twitter. I try to reply as much as possible. Also, free consultation is actually available. So if you're an engineer and you kind of want help in figuring things out, and as long as this basic setup where I don't have to invest too much time, I'm more than happy to kind of sit around and talk. Or if you're a brand, I'm again more than happy to kind of, have a call, see where things work out and that kind of stuff. So yeah, also you can check us out at heromedia.com. This is the agency side. We are booked till August of 24, but I'm more than happy to kind of figure out if we can work something out, or if like I know a lot of agencies, and if we could figure something out. So yeah, I mean, like if you're an engineer or a brand, more than happy to kind of get in touch. And I hope the video made sense, because it's almost like 3:30 in the morning when I actually record this, and I'm like, okay, this actually needs to be done now. And yeah, I hope the entire thing made sense. And if there's anything that needs more explanation, I'm more than happy to create a new series where we kind of go over the entire thing step by step. And yeah, hope you guys have a great day. Like and subscribe, I guess. I'm not used to doing this YouTuber stuff anymore.